The Galactic Educational Consortium prided itself on being the most progressive institution in known space. Their flagship academy on station Nexus welcomed students from over 300 species, all learning together in perfect harmony under the watchful guidance of the galaxy's most enlightened educators. The promotional material spoke eloquently of diversity, understanding, and the beautiful symphony of different cultures coming together in pursuit of knowledge. What those promotional materials didn't mention was that some cultures were considered more equal than others. 7-year-old Tommy Chen sat in the back row of advanced Xenobiology, his small human frame dwarfed by the specialized seating designed for larger alien physiologies. His Earth-standard uniform looked almost primitive compared to the elaborate ceremonial robes and biosuits worn by his classmates, but his brown eyes burned with the kind of curiosity that made teachers either love or fear their students. Today we examine the fascinating adaptation mechanisms of civilized species, announced Professor Kelvax, a towering Xenolithian whose crystalline hide caught the classroom's artificial light in prismatic rainbows. His forearms gestured gracefully at the holographic displays, showing various alien evolutionary trees. Notice how intelligence correlates directly with peaceful development and environmental harmony. Tommy's hand shot up with enthusiasm only a 7-year-old could muster. Professor, what about predator-prey relationships? Don't those drive evolution too? The crystalline professor's mandibles clicked in what might have been irritation. We are discussing civilized evolution, young human, not the barbaric processes that occur on primitive worlds. But Earth has lots of examples, Tommy continued, oblivious to the subtle warning in the professor's tone. My dad showed me pictures of lions and gazelles and sharks and these really cool spiders that... Enough! Professor Kelvax's voice cracked like breaking crystal, silencing not just Tommy but the entire classroom. This is precisely why Deathworld species require additional guidance. Your primitive fascination with violence and predation has no place in civilized discourse. Tommy's face flushed red, but his voice remained steady. I wasn't talking about violence. I was talking about science. Evolution through selection pressure is basic biology. The professor's forearms trembled with barely contained rage. In Xenolithian culture, being corrected by a child was the ultimate insult, and being corrected by a primitive Deathworld child was beyond comprehension. You will not disrupt my classroom with your barbaric worldview, he hissed, his crystalline features darkening to an ominous purple. Perhaps a lesson in respect is required. What happened next would later be dissected by galactic behavioral analysts, military strategists, and xenopsychologists for decades to come. But in that moment, it was simply an adult alien striking a human child for the crime of asking questions. Professor Kelvax's primary manipulation appendage, roughly equivalent to a human arm but ending in sharp crystalline projections, swept across Tommy's face with enough force to knock the boy from his specialized chair. The sound of the impact echoed through the suddenly silent classroom like a gunshot. Tommy hit the floor hard, his small body crumpling against the alien-designed furniture that offered no accommodation for his size. A thin line of blood appeared on his cheek, where one of the professor's crystalline edges had caught him. But more importantly, something had changed in the boy's eyes. The curiosity was gone. In its place was something that made several of the more perceptive alien students instinctively back away from their fallen classmate. There! Professor Kelvax announced with satisfaction, his crystalline form returning to its normal blue-white coloration. Perhaps now you understand the importance of knowing your place in civilized society. Tommy slowly pushed himself to his feet, his small hand wiping the blood from his cheek. When he looked up at his professor, his expression was perfectly calm. You made a mistake, he said quietly. Professor Kelvax laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. The only mistake was allowing a primitive species into this institution, but that error can be corrected. No, Tommy replied, his voice carrying a strange certainty that made the classroom's environmental systems seem to hum with tension. Your mistake was thinking I was alone here. The professor's mandibles clicked in confusion. What are you talking about, child? Tommy smiled then, and several alien students would later require psychological counseling to forget that expression. It wasn't the smile of a hurt child seeking comfort or revenge. It was a smile of someone who had just remembered that they belonged to the most dangerous species in known space. You see, Tommy continued conversationally, pulling out his personal communication device with movements that seemed far too controlled for a 7-year-old. My mom works in the Galactic Military Liaison Office. My dad is with the Human Diplomatic Corps. My uncle commands the Earth Defense Fleet. And my aunt, he paused, his smile widening. My aunt is Director of Human Colonial Affairs. Professor Kelvax's crystalline features began to show the first hints of uncertainty. Are you threatening me, child? Threatening? Tommy's laugh was bright and innocent and absolutely terrifying. Oh no, Professor. I'm not threatening anyone. I'm just letting my family know that someone in the galactic education system thinks humans are primitive and need to be taught our place through physical violence. His small fingers danced across the communication device's interface with practiced ease. I'm sure they'll find that very interesting, especially the part where a representative of galactic civilization struck a human child for asking scientific questions. The blood drained from Professor Kelvax's features, his crystalline skin shifting to a sickly yellow color that indicated extreme distress among the species. Now wait just a moment. Message sent, Tommy announced cheerfully. Oh, and I made sure to include the classroom security recordings, the ones that show everything that happened here today. Funny how human technology is so primitive, but we still manage to make sure our children's safety is monitored at all times. The professor's forearms began to shake as the implications of what had just occurred penetrated his consciousness. Striking a child of any species was a serious offense. But striking a human child, a member of the species that had earned their place in galactic society through military prowess and an alarming willingness to use violence when provoked, was essentially a declaration of war. I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding, Professor Kelvax stammered, his superior attitude evaporating like mist in a solar wind. Perhaps we could discuss this rationally. Oh, we're way past discussion, Tommy replied with a kind of certainty that made adults realize they had seriously underestimated a child. See, the thing about humans is that we really don't like it when someone hurts our kids. It makes us do unreasonable things. His communication device chimed with an incoming message. Tommy glanced at it, and his smile became positively radiant. Oh, good. Mom got my message. She says to tell you that the Human Rights Committee will be very interested in your teaching methods. Dad wants to know if this represents official galactic policy toward human children. Uncle Marcus is asking whether this incident requires a military response. Tommy paused, savoring Professor's growing terror. And Aunt Sarah's wondering if the Galactic Educational Consortium understand the difference between civilized discourse and acceptable targets. Professor Kelvax's crystalline form had shifted to a deep red color that indicated panic bordering on system failure. Please, I'm sure we can resolve this through proper channels. Oh, I'm sure we can too, Tommy agreed cheerfully. But here's the thing about proper channels when it comes to humans. Sometimes they involve very large warships and people who get really upset when you mess with their families. Another chime from his device made Tommy's expression brighten even further. Ooh, this one's from Admiral Chen. That's my grandfather. By the way, he wants to know if striking human children is now considered an acceptable form of galactic diplomacy. And he's asking whether the Educational Consortium would prefer to resolve this matter through official inquiry or, Tommy paused, reading carefully, through more traditional human methods of conflict resolution. The classroom had fallen into the kind of silence that usually preceded natural disasters or military actions. Even the alien students who had initially supported their professor's treatment of the primitive human were beginning to understand that they had just witnessed something that was going to have consequences far beyond a simple disciplinary action. Professor Kelvax's voice had deteriorated to a barely audible whisper. What do you want? Tommy tilted his head with the innocent curiosity of a child who had never quite learned the difference between reasonable requests and ultimatums that could reshape galactic politics. Want? Oh, I don't want anything, Professor. I'm just a primitive human child who asked some science questions and got hit for it. But my family... He paused, his smile taking on quality that made the classroom's lighting seem dimmer. My family wants to make sure this never happens to another human child. Ever. His communication device erupted in a cascade of incoming messages, each chime representing another piece of the human power structure becoming aware of what occurred in advanced Xenobiology class. Tommy read through them with the kind of satisfaction that suggested he understood exactly what kind of storm he had just unleashed. Let's see, he mused aloud. The Colonial Defense Corps want a full investigation. The Human Rights Commission is calling for immediate sanctions. The Earth Defense Fleet is requesting clarification on whether this constitutes an act of aggression against human civilians. And Tommy's eyes widened with delight. The Human Colonial Council is asking whether the Galactic Educational Consortium would like to explain their policies on physical violence against human children to the assembled representatives of every human colony in known space. Professor Kelvax made a sound that his species usually reserved for impending death. This is getting completely out of hand. It was a simple disciplinary action. A simple disciplinary action, Tommy repeated thoughtfully. Is that what we're calling it when aliens hit human children now? That's interesting. I wonder what the Human Colonial Navy calls it when member species of the galactic community assault human citizens. The boy's innocent expression never wavered, but something in his tone made it clear that he was no longer just a 7-year-old who had been struck by his teacher. He was a representative of a species that had fought its way to galactic prominence through a combination of tactical genius, technological innovation, and absolute refusal to back down from any challenge. Please, Professor Kelvax whispered, his crystalline form now cycling through colors that indicated complete psychological collapse. What will it take to resolve the situation? Tommy considered this question with the gravity of someone far older than his 7 years. Well, he said finally, I think that's going to be up to them now. His communication device chimed one final time, and Tommy's smile transformed into something that would haunt Professor Kelvax's nightmares for the rest of his considerably shortened career. Oh, this is interesting. Admiral Chen wants to know if you'd be willing to discuss your educational philosophy with the Human Colonial Fleet, in person, on the flagship, tomorrow. Tommy looked up at his professor with the bright-eyed enthusiasm of a child who had just learned that Christmas was coming early. I think you should probably say yes, Professor. Humans really don't like to be kept waiting when someone's hurt one of our kids. And as Professor Kelvax contemplated the ruins of his career, his reputation, and quite possibly his continued existence, he began to understand that striking a human child hadn't just been a mistake. It had been a declaration of war against the most dangerous species in the galaxy, a species that was about to remind the entire galactic community why Deathworlds produce survivors, not victims. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called for dawn station time, but by the time the delegates began filing into the massive assembly chamber, 3 human battle fleets had already taken position around key galactic infrastructure points, and every human colony in known space had gone to what they euphemistically called heightened security status. Chancellor Vexus of the Altarian Republic stood at the central podium, her normally composed features showing the strain of someone who had spent the previous 18 hours trying to prevent an interspecies war over what was being described in official reports as an educational incident. Honored delegates, she began, her voice carrying across the vast chamber through translation matrices that converted her words into hundreds of different languages. We are here to address the recent events at Station Nexus and the human response to those events. In the human delegation section, Ambassador Sarah Chan sat with the kind of stillness that predators display before striking. Her formal diplomatic attire did nothing to disguise the fact that she was barely restraining herself from declaring war on behalf of every human colony in existence. The facts are not in dispute, Chancellor Vexus continued, clearly hoping that speaking quickly would somehow make the situation less catastrophic. Professor Kelvax of the Zilithian Educational Authority struck a human child during a classroom discussion. The child, Tommy Chen, subsequently contacted his family members who hold various positions within the human governmental and military structure. Positions, Ambassador Chen interrupted with deadly calm. They include oversight of human colonial defense, interspecies relations, and military deployment authorization. The Chancellor's throat sacs inflated nervously. Yes, well, the human response has been comprehensive. That was diplomatic understatement at its finest. In the 16 hours since Tommy Chen had sent his first message, the human colonial government had mobilized resources on a scale not seen since the Korthax Wars. Trade routes have been suspended, diplomatic meetings have been canceled, and every human military asset in the galaxy have received updated targeting coordinates for critical galactic infrastructure. The Galactic Educational Consortium wishes to express their sincere regret for this unfortunate incident, stammered Director Thylix, whose species had the misfortune of overseeing the institution where everything had gone wrong. Professor Kelvax has been suspended pending a full investigation, and we are prepared to offer appropriate compensation. Compensation? The voice belonged to Admiral Marcus Chen, Tommy's uncle, whose presence at what was supposed to be a diplomatic meeting suggested that the humans were no longer particularly interested in diplomatic solutions. You want to compensate us for assault against a human child. The Admiral's tone was conversational, but every military officer in the chamber recognized the sound of someone who had already decided that violence was inevitable and was simply going through the motions of civilization before unleashing it. What would be appropriate compensation for teaching a 7-year-old human that asking scientific questions will result in physical assault from alien authority figures? Admiral Chen continued, his voice carrying the kind of reasonable curiosity that made smart people start looking for exits. Credits? Technology transfers? Public apologies? Director Thylix seemed to deflate with relief. All those options are certainly under consideration. Good. Admiral Chen replied cheerfully, because I've been wondering what would be appropriate compensation for declaring war on human children. The chamber fell silent, except for the soft hum of life support systems, and what sounded like quiet sobbing from several delegates who were beginning to understand the full scope of what was happening. War. Chancellor Vexus squeaked, her throat sacs now fully inflated in distress. Surely that's an overstatement. Is it? Admiral Chen asked with a kind of innocent curiosity that his nephew had inherited. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like a representative of your civilized galactic community decided that human children are acceptable targets for physical violence. That sounds like a declaration of war to me. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing with the relentless logic that had made humans such effective negotiators. Now, I'm just a simple military officer, so maybe I don't understand the subtleties of galactic diplomacy. But when someone hits one of our kids, we tend to take that personally. Very personally. Ambassador Chen rose from her seat with fluid grace, her diplomatic credentials doing nothing to hide the fact that she was the sister of one of the most dangerous military commanders in human space. My brother raises an excellent point, she said with a kind of smile that made career diplomats consider early retirement. The human position is quite simple. An alien authority figure struck a human child for the crime of asking questions in a classroom. This action was witnessed by multiple parties, and is a matter of public record. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the assembled delegates with the kind of attention that made them acutely aware of their own mortality. The question before this council is whether this represents the official position of galactic civilization toward human children, or whether it was an isolated incident that will be addressed with the full weight of galactic justice. Director Thylix cleared his throat nervously. Obviously, it was an isolated incident. Professor Kelvax acted without authority, against all established protocols. Did he? Ambassador Chen's voice carried the kind of curiosity that suggested she already knew the answer and was simply enjoying watching people dig their own graves. Because, according to our investigation, Professor Kelvax has a documented history of discriminatory behavior towards students from what you call primitive species. The silence that followed this revelation was deafening. Furthermore, Ambassador Chen continued relentlessly, our review of galactic educational standards reveals a systematic pattern of bias against Deathworld species, with particular emphasis on restricting human participation in advanced programs. Chancellor Vexus made a sound that her species usually reserved for natural disasters. That's a very serious accusation. It's a very serious situation, Admiral Chen interjected, which is why the Human Colonial Council has authorized me to present the galactic community with a choice. Every delegate in the chamber leaned forward despite their obvious terror. When humans offered choices, the options usually range from bad to catastrophic. Option 1. Admiral Chen began with the cheerful tone of someone discussing weekend plans. the galactic community acknowledges that striking human children is completely unacceptable, implements immediate reforms to prevent future incidents, and provides appropriate justice for the assault on Tommy Chen. He paused, his smile widening. Option 2. We assume that this incident represents the official galactic position on human children and respond accordingly. Respond how? Director Thylix whispered, though his expression suggested he really didn't want to know the answer. Admiral Chen's expression never changed, but something in his tone made the chamber's environmental systems seem to malfunction. Human colonies have been dealing with hostile alien species for over 2 centuries. We've developed very effective methods for handling threats to our children. The holographic displays around the chamber suddenly activated, showing real-time tactical information that made every military officer present simultaneously impressed and terrified. Human fleet positions, weapons capabilities, strategic resources, defensive installations, and colonial militias were laid out in detail that suggested the humans had been planning for this exact scenario for a very long time. As you can see, Admiral Chen continued conversationally. We've had some time to consider what an appropriate response might look like if the galactic community decided that human children were legitimate targets. The display showed enough firepower to reduce entire star systems to cosmic dust, deployed with a kind of strategic precision that indicated extensive planning and unlimited resources. Of course, Ambassador Chen added with diplomatic sweetness, we'd much prefer option 1. Chancellor Vexus stared at the displays with the expression of someone watching their entire civilization hang in the balance. What exactly would option 1 entail? Simple, Admiral Chen replied. Professor Kelvax faces justice under human colonial law for assault on a human child. The Galactic Educational Consortium undergoes immediate reform to eliminate anti-human bias. And most importantly, his smile became something that would haunt diplomatic nightmares for generations. Every authority figure in galactic space understands that human children are absolutely, completely, utterly off limits. Forever. And if we agree to these terms? Chancellor Vexus asked weakly. Then we all go back to being civilized. Ambassador Chen replied cheerfully. Trade resumes. Diplomatic relations continue. And everyone remembers that humans are reasonable people who just happen to get unreasonable when you threaten our families. The vote was unanimous. Even the Zalithian delegation, despite their species' loyalty to Professor Kelvax, recognized that opposing the human terms would result in their civilization becoming a footnote in galactic history. 3 days later, Tommy Chen sat in his family's quarters on Station Nexus, his small cut completely healed, but his understanding of galactic politics had significantly expanded. His parents had explained that sometimes adults made bad choices, and sometimes those bad choices had consequences that affected everyone. So, Professor Kelvax is going to a human prison? Tommy asked, looking up from his homework with the kind of innocent curiosity that had started this entire crisis. Professor Kelvax is going to face justice under human law. His mother replied carefully. He hurt a human child, and we don't let people get away with that. Tommy nodded solemnly. And now all the alien teachers know they can't hit human kids? Now everyone knows, his father confirmed. Not just teachers. Everyone. Tommy considered this for a moment, then returned to his homework with a satisfied expression of a child who had learned that asking questions was not only safe, but actively protected by the most powerful military force in known space. Meanwhile, throughout the galaxy, the incident became known as the Doctrine, a policy stating that violence against human children will be met with overwhelming retaliation from the entire human species. It was carved into diplomatic treaties, programmed into artificial intelligences, and taught in military academies as an example of how quickly civilization could collapse when someone made a mistake of threatening a human family. Professor Kelvax, after serving his sentence in human colonial detention, spent the rest of his life giving lectures on interspecies relations, with particular emphasis on why understanding cultural differences was crucial for maintaining galactic peace. He never struck another student, and his former crystalline arrogance had been permanently replaced with the kind of humility that came from nearly triggering an interstellar war. And in classrooms across the galaxy, When alien instructors encountered curious human children asking difficult questions, they remembered the Chen Doctrine and chose their responses very, very carefully. Because the galaxy had learned a valuable lesson about the difference between civilized species and dangerous ones. Civilized species had rules about proportional response and diplomatic solutions. Dangerous species had children to protect. And when it came protecting their young, humans had proven that they were willing to burn down the entire galaxy to keep them safe. It was, the Galactic community agreed, a lesson they never wanted to learn again.